Margaret Chen counted the exact number of pills rattling in the bottle as she struggled to twist the childproof cap with her arthritic fingers. 18 pills left. 18 days until she'd have to call the pharmacy and beg them to deliver again because none of her 3 children had visited in 4 years to help their 73-year-old mother open a simple bottle. The phone sat silent on the kitchen counter, its black screen reflecting her hunched figure like a dark mirror. 127 days of silence. She knew because she'd marked each day on the calendar with a red X, watching the X's multiply like a disease spreading across the months. But today, that silence was about to end in the most devastating way possible. Margaret pulled out her cell phone with trembling hands and opened her banking app. The numbers glowed accusingly: checking account balance, $47,000. Savings account, $112,000. Money she'd scraped together working double shifts as a hospital nurse for 30 years after her husband abandoned them. Money that had bought her children's college educations, wedding down payments, business loans, and 4 years of silence. She scrolled through her transaction history like reading a diary of her own destruction. $3,000 to Michael 6 months ago for his failing restaurant. $5,000 to Rebecca 8 months ago for the twins' private school tuition. $2,000 to David 10 months ago for his law office renovation. Before that, more transfers, more emergencies, more promises to pay her back that evaporated like steam. The last text exchange with her youngest child, Michael, glowed on her screen like evidence in a murder trial. Michael: Mom, I hate to ask, but we're behind on rent and if I don't pay by Friday, we'll lose everything. Can you help? Just this once, I promise. Margaret: Of course, sweetheart. I'll transfer $3,000 today. How are you doing? Are you eating enough? Michael: You're a lifesaver, Mom. Really? I'll pay you back as soon as we turn the corner. Margaret: I don't need you to pay me back. I need you to call me sometimes. I need to know you're okay. Michael: I will, I promise. Love you. That was 6 months ago. The $3,000 cleared her account the same day. The promise to call had died in digital silence. Margaret's chest tightened as she remembered the woman she used to be. The mother who bandaged scraped knees and stayed up all night when they had fevers. The woman who worked Christmas shifts at the hospital so she could afford the toys they wanted. The single parent who sacrificed every personal dream to give her children opportunities she'd never had. When had she become nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat? The doorbell chimed at exactly 10 a.m., the sound cutting through her thoughts like salvation. Rosa Martinez stepped through the door with her warm smile and kind eyes, the only person in Margaret's life who seemed to care whether she lived or died. Good morning, Mrs. Chen, Rosa said, setting down her nursing bag. How are we feeling today? Like a woman planning her own funeral, Margaret replied, then watched Rosa's face shift to concern. Mrs. Chen, that's a troubling thing to say. Are you having thoughts of harming yourself? No, Rosa. I'm having thoughts of harming them. Margaret led Rosa to the kitchen table where she'd spread out 4 years of bank statements, cancelled checks, and printed text messages like evidence at a crime scene. The numbers told a story more devastating than any thriller. $147,000 sent to her 3 children over 4 years. $147,000 in exchange for complete emotional abandonment. Look at this, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. David has received $37,000 from me since 2021. Rebecca, $42,000. Michael, $68,000. Do you want to know how many times they've called just to see how I'm doing? 0. Do you want to know how many times they've visited without needing money? 0. Rosa's professional composure cracked as she studied the documentation. In 20 years of caring for elderly patients, she'd seen family neglect in many forms, but this felt different. This felt calculated. Mrs. Chen, this is financial elder abuse. No, Margaret said quietly. This is something worse. This is emotional extortion. They've trained me to buy their attention with money, and I've been stupid enough to pay the price. She pulled out her phone and showed Rosa the last message she'd sent to all 3 children a week ago. I love you. David had responded 2 hours later asking if she needed anything. Rebecca had promised to call next week. Michael hadn't responded at all. Even when I just tell them I love them, they assume I want something or need something, Margaret continued. They can't imagine their mother reaching out simply because she misses them. Because in their minds, I exist to solve problems and write checks. Rosa set down the bank statements, her hands shaking slightly. What are you planning to do? Margaret looked at this woman who'd shown her more genuine care in 6 months than her own children had in 4 years. Rosa, who wasn't even family, who called to check on her between visits, who remembered her favorite tea and asked about her dreams and listened to her stories about the past. "I'm going to find out what I'm really worth to them," Margaret said. "I'm going to discover whether they love me or just love what I can do for them." The plan that emerged over the next hour was audacious, potentially cruel, and absolutely necessary. Margaret would fake her own death. She would let her children believe she had died peacefully in her sleep, then watch how they behaved when they thought she was gone forever. "Mrs. Chen, I cannot be part of this," Rosa said, her voice firm. "This could traumatize them. What if they genuinely grieve? What if they realize what they've lost? Then I'll know there's hope," Margaret replied. "But Rosa, I need to know the truth. Are they mourning their mother, or are they calculating their inheritance? Do they miss me, or do they miss my checkbook?" Margaret walked to her desk and pulled out a manila folder containing 2 documents. "I've already had my lawyer draft 2 wills. The real one, which leaves everything to you because you've been more of a daughter to me than my own daughter. And a fake one, which they'll find in my desk, leaving everything to charity with a note explaining that children who show no interest in their mother's life shouldn't expect to benefit from her death." Rosa's eyes widened. "You're leaving everything to me." "You've earned it," Margaret said simply. "You've shown up. You've cared. You've treated me like a human being instead of an ATM. If my own children can't be bothered to love me while I'm alive, why should they profit from my death?" The moral complexity of the situation hit Rosa like a physical blow. Margaret's children weren't monsters, they were selfish, neglectful adults who'd been enabled by their mother's unconditional financial support. But Margaret's plan was extreme, potentially devastating to people who might genuinely love her despite their selfishness. "What if this destroys your relationship with them forever?" Rosa asked. "What relationship?" Margaret's voice cracked. "I haven't had a real conversation with any of them in 4 years. They call when they need money. They text when they want something. They visit never. The relationship is already destroyed, Rosa. I'm just finally admitting it." Over the next 2 weeks, they refined the plan with the precision of seasoned criminals. Margaret would check into a small hotel across town under Rosa's maiden name. Rosa would arrive for her regularly scheduled visit and discover that Margaret had died peacefully in her sleep. The fake will would be positioned prominently on Margaret's desk, along with a heartbreaking note about dying alone and unloved. But the real test would come when Margaret revealed herself to be alive, confronting her children with the truth of how they behaved in the face of her supposed death. The first crack in Margaret's resolve came 2 weeks into their planning, when Rebecca finally called. "Mom, I hate to bother you, but we're in a bind," Rebecca said, her voice tight with familiar stress. "The twins' school is requiring an $800 deposit for the science trip to Washington, D.C., and with Mark's hours being cut, we just can't make it happen. Could you help us out? I promise I'll pay you back when Mark's situation improves." Margaret's hand trembled as she held the phone. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to say yes, to transfer the money, to solve the problem and feel needed for another brief moment. But Rosa's words echoed in her mind. "You're not their mother anymore. You're their bank." "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Margaret said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can't help with that right now." The silence stretched so long Margaret wondered if the call had dropped. "You can't?" Rebecca's voice carried the confusion of someone whose understanding of reality had just shifted. "I can't," Margaret repeated. "But Mom, it's for the twins. It's educational. They'll be devastated if they can't go with their classmates." "Then you and Mark will need to figure out how to make it work," Margaret said, each word feeling like swallowing broken glass. "I don't understand," Rebecca said, and now there was an edge of panic in her voice. "You've always helped before. What's changed? Are you having money problems? Do you need me to look at your finances?" The irony hit Margaret like a slap. Her daughter's first assumption wasn't that Margaret might need emotional support or have her own struggles. Rebecca's immediate concern was whether the bank was still open for business. "I'm not your ATM, Rebecca," Margaret said quietly. "I'm your mother. There's a difference." "Of course you're my mother," Rebecca protested. "That's why I'm asking for help. That's what mothers do, they help their children." "And what do children do for their mothers?" Margaret asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without needing something? When was the last time you asked about my life, my health, my happiness instead of immediately launching into your financial crisis of the month?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I've been busy, Mom," Rebecca said finally. "The twins have activities, Mark's job situation has been stressful, and I thought you understood that we were going through a rough patch. You've been going through a rough patch for 4 years, Margaret said. And I've been going through a lonely patch for just as long, but somehow my rough patch doesn't qualify for the same sympathy as your bank account. That's not fair, Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. When was the last time you asked how I'm doing and actually waited for an answer? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? When was the last time you brought my granddaughters to see me without me having to beg? Each question landed like a small stone thrown into still water, creating ripples that spread until they filled the entire conversation with uncomfortable truth. I know I haven't been the best daughter lately, Rebecca admitted, but things have been crazy, and I thought you knew that I loved you. I hoped you loved me, Margaret corrected. But love isn't something you feel, Rebecca. It's something you do. And for 4 years, the only thing you've done is ask for money. The conversation ended with Rebecca's familiar promises to do better, call more often, visit soon. The same empty promises Margaret had been hearing for years. But this time, Margaret didn't send the money. This time, she held firm and watched her daughter's true priorities reveal themselves. The backlash came within hours. David called that evening, his lawyer voice in full prosecution mode. Mom, Rebecca told me about your conversation today. I think you're being unreasonable and potentially having some kind of cognitive episode. A cognitive episode? Margaret's voice turned dangerously quiet. You're acting irrationally. Rebecca is your daughter. She's struggling financially. You have money sitting in the bank earning minimal interest, and your own granddaughters are going to miss an educational opportunity because you're having some kind of psychological breakdown. I'm 73, David. If I'm having a midlife crisis, I'm planning to live to be 146. This isn't funny, Mom. Family helps family. That's how functional families work. You're absolutely right, Margaret said. Family does help family. So when exactly are you planning to help me? What do you mean? You don't need help. You're financially stable and living independently, am I? Margaret felt 4 years of suppressed rage rising in her chest like lava. I'm 73 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for me, with arthritis so severe that some mornings I can't open my pill bottles. I fell in the bathroom last month and lay on the cold tile for 2 hours before I could get up. I hired a nurse to check on me 3 times a week because my own children couldn't be bothered to call 3 times a year. Why didn't you tell us about the fall? David asked, but his voice had lost some of its legal authority. When would I have told you, David? In the 30 seconds between your asking how I am and launching into your latest financial emergency. In the gap between your promises to visit and your requests for loans. When exactly in our non-existent relationship was I supposed to share my vulnerabilities? David was quiet for a long moment. Look, I know I haven't been the most attentive son. You haven't been a son at all, Margaret interrupted. You've been a customer. You call when you need a service, you're polite enough to get what you want, and then you disappear until your next transaction. That's not true. When was the last time you were in this house, David? When was the last time you hugged me? When was the last time you told me about your work, your dreams, your fears, your life beyond what you needed from me to finance it? Silence. I love you, Margaret continued, her voice breaking. I love all 3 of you more than my own life. But I won't be your ATM anymore. I won't buy your attention with checks and loans and bailouts. Either you want a relationship with me, or you don't. But you can't have my money without having me. Mom, you're being emotional and irrational. You're not thinking clearly about the long-term implications of this decision. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Margaret said. And here's what I'm thinking, I'm going to find out what I'm worth to my children when they can't use me as their personal bank. I'm going to discover whether you love me or just love what I can provide. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear and liberation. Over the following month, the silence from her children grew deeper and more revealing. Rebecca sent a few passive-aggressive text messages about how hurt she was that her own mother wouldn't help her grandchildren. David fired off several legal-sounding emails about family obligations and financial responsibility. Michael remained completely absent, apparently unaware that his primary funding source had been permanently discontinued. But in that silence, something unexpected happened. Margaret began to remember who she was before she became their ATM. She returned to her abandoned garden, pulling weeds with her arthritic hands and finding deep satisfaction in clearing away dead growth to make room for new life. She enrolled in a pottery class at the community center, her fingers remembering the joy of creating something beautiful instead of just writing checks. She started reading mystery novels again, staying up past midnight to finish chapters because she wanted to, not because she was waiting for a phone to ring that never did. "You seem different, Mrs. Chen," Rosa observed during one of her visits. "Stronger somehow. I feel like I'm waking up from a very long, very expensive dream," Margaret replied. "For 4 years, I've been living for other people's problems. Every day was about managing their crises, worrying about their finances, trying to help them without enabling them. I lost myself somewhere in all that misguided mothering. And now I'm remembering that I'm a person with my own life, my own interests, my own value that has nothing to do with my bank account balance. When was the last time I did something just because it made me happy? When was the last time I made a decision based on what I wanted instead of what they needed?" As Margaret's independence grew, so did her resolve to follow through with the plan. She realized that her children had become strangers to her, not because time had changed them, but because she'd never required them to be anything more than grateful recipients of her generosity. She knew their debts better than their dreams, their financial problems better than their personal hopes. The final conversation that sealed her decision came when Michael finally called, 6 weeks after she'd stopped sending money. "Mom, what the hell?" His voice was angry, entitled, shocked. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. My account's been overdrawn because the usual transfer didn't come through." "What's going on?" "The usual transfer?" Margaret repeated slowly. "Yeah, the monthly money. It didn't show up, and now I'm behind on everything. My credit's getting destroyed because you forgot to send my allowance." Allowance. Her 35-year-old son had just called her financial support his allowance, as if she were legally obligated to fund his lifestyle. "Michael," Margaret said carefully, "I'm your mother, not your employer. There is no usual transfer. There is no monthly allowance. There's just a woman who loves you enough to have enabled your financial irresponsibility for 4 years. What are you talking about? You've always helped when I needed it. That's what family does." "What family does, Michael, is maintain relationships that aren't based on money. What family does is call each other, visit each other, care about each other's lives beyond their bank account balances." "I do care about you, Mom. You know that, do I? Because the only time I hear from you is when you need money. You didn't call on my birthday. You didn't call on Mother's Day. You didn't call when I was sick with pneumonia last winter. But your rent was due, and suddenly you remembered you had a mother. I've been busy building my business." "Your business failed, Michael. The restaurant closed 3 months ago, but you never told me. You kept taking money for a business that didn't exist." The silence on the other end confirmed what Margaret had suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. Her youngest child had been lying to her, taking money under false pretenses, treating her like a mark in a con game. "I was going to tell you," Michael said finally. "I just needed time to figure things out." "You needed time to figure out how to keep stealing from your mother without getting caught." "I wasn't stealing. You gave me that money. I gave money to help your restaurant. Money taken under false pretenses is theft, Michael. You stole from me." The conversation ended with Michael hanging up on her, but not before Margaret heard him mutter something about "crazy old woman" under his breath. That night, Margaret sat in her hotel room. She'd checked in 3 days earlier to prepare for the final phase of her plan, and thought about the 3 babies she'd brought home from the hospital decades ago. David, serious and studious. Rebecca, bright and energetic. Michael, sweet and clingy. Where had those children gone? When had they been replaced by these strangers who saw her only as a resource to be exploited? Maybe tomorrow she would find out. Maybe tomorrow she would learn whether any part of the children she'd raised still existed inside the adults who called only when they needed money. Tomorrow, Rosa would arrive at Margaret's house for her regular appointment and discover that Margaret had died peacefully in her sleep. Tomorrow, her children would rush home not to mourn their mother, but to secure their inheritance. Tomorrow, Margaret would learn what she was really worth to the people she'd loved more than life itself. Tomorrow, she would either save her family or bury it forever. Margaret pulled out her phone and looked at the last photo she had of all 3 children together, Rebecca's wedding, 8 years ago. They were smiling, but even then, Margaret could see the distance in their eyes. Even then, she was already becoming more valuable for her checkbook than her presence. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that when she woke up, she would begin the most important performance of her life. A performance that would either reveal her children's capacity for genuine love, or confirm that the greatest tragedy of her life wasn't that she was going to die alone, it was that she'd been living alone for years without realizing it. The phone hadn't rung in 127 days. Tomorrow, it would ring for the last time. And Margaret Chen would finally learn what she was worth to the people who'd forgotten that love wasn't a transaction, and family wasn't a business arrangement. The reading of the real will was about to begin. The call came at exactly 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday that would split Margaret Chen's life into before and after. Rosa's hands trembled as she dialed David's number from Margaret's kitchen, staring at the empty bedroom where she'd carefully arranged the scene of a peaceful death. Rumpled sheets, reading glasses folded beside a half-finished crossword puzzle, an empty water glass on the nightstand, all the details of a woman who'd simply gone to sleep and never woken up. Margaret listened from her hotel room across town, her heart hammering as Rosa delivered the performance that would change everything. "Mr. Chen. This is Rosa Martinez, your mother's nurse. I'm calling with very difficult news." David answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the distracted tone of a man interrupted during billable hours. "Yes. What's the problem? I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but your mother passed away this morning. She had chest pains during the night and she went very peacefully." The silence stretched so long Margaret wondered if the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was flat, almost businesslike. "She's dead. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Chen. I found her this morning when I arrived for our scheduled appointment." Another pause. Then, what about? I mean, what's the procedure now? What happens with the house and her affairs? Margaret's heart cracked. Not, how did she die? Not, was she in pain? Not, did she say anything? His first concern was logistics. His second was property. "I've contacted the funeral home as she requested," Rosa continued, her voice steady despite the lie. "I also found her lawyer's number and called Mr. Morrison. He said there would need to be a reading of the will. When? Tomorrow at 2 p.m. At the house. I'll be there. Thank you for handling everything so efficiently." Margaret hung up the hotel phone and stared at her reflection in the mirror. 73 years of life, and her eldest child's response to her death was to thank someone for handling it efficiently. Rebecca's call was next. She cried, real tears that gave Margaret a flicker of hope, but within minutes was asking about funeral costs and life insurance policies. "Oh God, Mom," Rebecca sobbed into the phone. "I can't believe she's gone. We just talked. When did we last talk? I feel so guilty that I didn't call more often." "She spoke about you often," Rosa said gently. "She loved you very much." "Did she? Was there life insurance?" "I'm not being greedy, but with Mark's hours cut and the twins' expenses, I need to know what we're dealing with financially." There it was. Even through genuine grief, Rebecca's mind went immediately to money. Margaret closed her eyes and felt something die inside her chest. Michael's phone went to voicemail 3 times before he finally answered. "What?" "I'm at work. Mr. Chen, this is Rosa Martinez, your mother's nurse. I'm calling with very sad news about your mother. Is she okay? She didn't send money this month and I really need." "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen. Your mother passed away this morning." Silence. "Then, she's dead?" "Yes, sir. I'm so sorry for your loss. What do I need to do?" "Not how. Not when. Not, was she alone. What do I need to do?" As if his mother's death was another item on his to-do list. Margaret hung up and sobbed into a hotel pillow, mourning not just the relationship she'd lost, but the children she'd apparently never really had. The next day, Margaret positioned herself in the bushes outside her own house at 1:45 p.m., watching 3 cars pull into the driveway. David's black BMW arrived first, followed by Rebecca's white SUV. Michael's beat-up Honda coughed to a stop behind them, the same car Margaret had helped him buy 2 years ago when his credit was too destroyed to get financing. For the first time in 4 years, all 3 of her children were under the same roof. She should have felt joy. Instead, she felt like an anthropologist studying an extinct species. Through the living room window, she watched them gather with James Morrison, her lawyer for 20 years. The man looked genuinely grief-stricken, playing his part perfectly as he prepared to read the fake will that would devastate her children, or reveal their true nature. Margaret slipped through the back door she'd left unlocked and positioned herself in the hallway where she could see and hear everything without being detected. "Before we begin," James said, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow, "I want to express my deepest condolences. Your mother was an extraordinary woman who loved you all more than life itself." "Thank you," David said impatiently, checking his Rolex. "Can we get started? I have a deposition at 4. Margaret's chest tightened. Her funeral hadn't even been scheduled yet, and her son was worried about his deposition. Rebecca sat on the edge of the couch, clutching tissues but checking her phone every few minutes. Michael slumped in what used to be his father's chair, looking hungover and resentful, as if his mother's death was personally inconvenient. Your mother's will is quite straightforward, James continued, opening his briefcase with practiced solemnity. She updated it recently, and I believe her final wishes will surprise you. He pulled out the fake document Margaret had crafted specifically for this moment. Not the real will that left everything to Rosa, but a decoy designed to test her children's true priorities. I, Margaret Chen, being of sound mind and broken heart, do hereby distribute my worldly possessions as follows. Margaret held her breath as James read the fabricated will. The house would be sold, with proceeds donated to the children's hospital where Margaret had worked for 30 years. Her savings accounts, inflated to nearly $500,000 in the document, would go to various charities. Her life insurance would fund scholarships for nursing students. To my children, James continued, I leave this final lesson: love cannot be inherited, and neither can the respect you never earned. You may contest this will if you choose, but know that every dollar you spend on lawyers is a dollar that proves exactly why you're not getting mine. The silence in the room was deafening. Michael's head snapped up like he'd been slapped. What the hell? She left us nothing. There must be a mistake, David said, his lawyer training kicking in. This can't be legal. Children have rights. Actually, James interrupted, your mother was very thorough. She documented years of financial support with minimal contact, creating a clear paper trail of your relationship dynamics. Rebecca started crying again, but these tears sounded different. Angrier. She can't do this. We're her children. We loved her, did you? James asked quietly, and the question hung in the air like smoke. Of course we did, David snapped. Just because we didn't call every day doesn't mean we didn't love her. When was the last time any of you visited? James pressed. Silence. When was the last time you called without needing money? More silence. Your mother kept detailed records, James continued, pulling out copies of bank statements and text messages. In 4 years, she gave David $37,000, Rebecca $42,000, and Michael $68,000. In exchange, she received a total of 0 visits, 0 calls that weren't related to money, and 0 acknowledgement of her birthdays, holidays, or medical emergencies. Michael stood up abruptly. This is bullshit. She was our mother. She was supposed to help us. That's what mothers do, is it? James asked. What do children do for their mothers? We had our own lives to live, Rebecca protested. Our own families, our own problems. She understood that, did she? Because her medical records show she fell in her bathroom and lay on the floor for 2 hours before she could get up. Did any of you know about that? Margaret watched her children's faces cycle through confusion, guilt, and finally, anger. Not grief, anger. They were angry at being confronted with their own neglect. She never told us she needed help, David said defensively. When would she have told you? James asked. In the 30 seconds between your asking how she was and launching into your latest financial crisis. The room erupted in defensive protests and blame shifting. Margaret listened to her children argue not about losing their mother, but about losing their inheritance. She heard them calculate legal fees for contesting the will, debate the value of her possessions, and strategize about challenging her mental competency. Not one of them said they would miss her. Not one of them shared a memory of her kindness. Not one of them seemed to grasp that a human being who had loved them unconditionally was gone forever. Margaret had heard enough. She stepped into the living room. Would she? 3 heads turned toward her in perfect synchronization. Michael's face went white as paper. Rebecca's mouth fell open in a silent scream. David grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. Jesus fucking Christ, Michael whispered. I'm having a heart attack. No, Margaret said calmly, but I almost did listening to how quickly you moved from grieving your mother to calculating your inheritance. Rebecca started hyperventilating. Mom. I don't. How are you? This isn't possible. I'm alive, Rebecca. Very much alive. And very, very disappointed. David found his voice first, his legal training providing a lifeline in his shock. What the hell is this? Some kind of sick psychological experiment. Not an experiment, David. A test. One you all failed more spectacularly than I ever imagined possible. James Morrison stood up, his face grave. Your mother asked me to help her discover what kind of people her children had become when they thought she couldn't judge them anymore. You faked your own death. Rebecca's voice rose to near hysteria. Do you have any idea what you put us through? The grief, the pain, the trauma. Margaret's composure cracked like a dam breaking. What about the trauma you've put me through for 4 years? For years of being treated like an ATM instead of your mother. For years of only hearing from you when you needed money. For years of broken promises, forgotten birthdays, and complete emotional abandonment. She walked to the mantel and picked up a framed photo of them as children, Christmas morning, 1987, their faces bright with innocence and joy. I raised you alone after your father abandoned us, she said, her back to them. I worked double shifts to pay for your clothes, your education, your opportunities. I gave up dating, gave up my dreams, gave up everything to make sure you had chances I never had. She turned around, and they saw tears streaming down her face. And somewhere along the way, you learned that your mother was a resource to be managed instead of a person to be loved. Mom, that's not true, Rebecca protested weakly. Isn't it? Michael, when was the last time you called me without needing money? Silence. Rebecca, when was the last time you visited without asking for financial help? More silence. David, when was the last time we had a conversation about my life, my health, my happiness, my fears? The silence stretched until it became its own damning answer. Margaret opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. James, would you please read my actual will now? Mom, you can't be serious about this, David said, panic creeping into his voice. Oh, I'm deadly serious. Margaret sat down in her recliner, the one she'd spent countless lonely evenings in. Read it, James. James took the envelope with steady hands. The real will is quite different from what we just discussed. Wait, Rebecca stood up, her voice desperate. Before you read that, I want to say something. Mom, I know I haven't been the best daughter. I know I've taken you for granted. But I do love you. We all love you, do you? Margaret asked quietly. Because 5 minutes ago, when you thought I was dead, not one of you said you'd miss me. Not one of you shared a favorite memory. Not one of you seemed to grasp that a person who loved you was gone forever. You immediately started calculating legal fees and inheritance values. Michael finally looked up from his hands. Mom, we were in shock. People process grief differently. You weren't processing grief, Michael. You were processing disappointment about money. There's a difference. She gestured to James. Read the will. I, Margaret Chen, being of sound mind and having witnessed the true character of my children, leave my entire estate to Rosa Martinez, who has shown me more genuine love and care in 6 months than my own children have shown in 4 years. Rebecca collapsed back onto the couch. Michael buried his face in his hands. David's mouth worked soundlessly. The house, the savings accounts, the life insurance, the jewelry, everything goes to Rosa Martinez, who has been named as both beneficiary and executor. You can't do this, David finally managed. We're your children. We're your blood, are you? Margaret asked. Because children love their parents. Children visit their parents. Children care whether their parents are lonely, afraid, or hurt. You've been my dependence, David. There's a difference. She stood up, feeling stronger than she had in months. Rosa cared for me when I was weak. She listened when I was lonely. She worried about my health and happiness. She asked about my dreams and fears. She remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding her. She called just to hear my voice. She earned what you assumed you deserved. What about forgiveness? Rebecca asked desperately. What about second chances? What about family? Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked at her. At 38, Rebecca still had the same pleading expression she'd worn as a child when caught stealing cookies. But this wasn't about forgotten chores or broken curfews. This was about 4 years of treating their mother like a bank. I gave you second chances every time I sent money you didn't earn, Margaret said. I gave you forgiveness every time you broke a promise to visit. I gave you unconditional love for 43 years. What I haven't given you is consequences. Consider this your education in what it feels like to lose someone you took for granted. Michael looked up, his eyes red and desperate. Mom, I'm sorry. I know I screwed up, but I need. You need, Margaret interrupted. That's all any of you have said to me for 4 years. What you need. What you want. What you require from me to solve your problems. Well, I need something too. I need to matter to my children for more than my bank account balance. She picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Rebecca called after her. To live, Margaret said without turning around. Rosa's picking me up. We're going to travel together. See places I never got to see because I was too busy working to support children who grew up to see me as their personal ATM. Mom, please, David said, and for the first time in years, he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. "We can change. We can do better. Give us another chance." Margaret paused at the door and looked back at the three people she'd loved more than her own life. "You're 45 years old, David. Rebecca, you're 38. Michael, you're 35. If you haven't learned how to love someone without conditions by now, that's not my failure anymore. It's yours." The sound of a car horn came from the driveway. "That's Rosa," Margaret said. "She's never once kept me waiting. She's never once broken a promise. She's never once made me feel like I only mattered for what I could provide." She opened the door, then stopped one final time. "For what it's worth, I do love you. I love the children you were and the adults I hoped you'd become. But I won't spend what's left of my life lonely and used just because we share DNA." Margaret Chen walked out of the house she'd called home for 35 years, leaving behind 3 children who finally understood the difference between being loved and deserving love. Through the window, they watched their mother get into a car with a woman who had shown her more genuine care in 6 months than they had in 4 years. The room filled with Rebecca's broken sobs, Michael's whispered apologies to an empty house, and David's sharp intake of breath as he realized he was already calculating whether hiring a lawyer to contest the will would cost more than his wounded pride was worth. "She can't be serious about this," David said finally, his voice hollow. "Look around," James Morrison said quietly, packing up his briefcase. "Does this look like a woman who wasn't serious?" "But we're her children," Rebecca wailed. "We made mistakes, but we're still her children." "No," James said, heading for the door. "You were her children. Now you're 3 middle-aged adults who just learned that love isn't a birthright. It's something you earn every single day." He paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, she agonized over this decision. She wanted to believe you loved her. She gave you every opportunity to prove it. You chose money over her every single time. The door closed behind him with finality. In the silence that followed, Rebecca, David, and Michael sat in their childhood home, surrounded by the evidence of a woman's love, family photos, handmade Christmas ornaments, report cards she'd saved, art projects still taped to the refrigerator, and finally understood what they'd lost. Not an inheritance. Not a safety net. Not a reliable source of emergency funds. They'd lost their mother. And unlike her death, which had been fake, this loss was devastatingly, irreversibly real. Outside, Margaret Chen smiled for the first time in 4 years as Rosa drove her toward a future where love wasn't something she had to buy, kindness wasn't something she had to earn, and family was something she could choose. The reading of the real will was over. The rest of her life was about to begin. And for the first time in 4 years, Margaret Chen felt truly, completely alive. If this ending just destroyed your soul like it destroyed mine, slam that like button and let me know in the comments. Did Margaret go too far, or did her children deserve exactly what they got? Share this story with someone who needs to understand that love is earned, not inherited. Subscribe for more heart-shattering true stories that will change how you see family forever. And tell me, would you have done what Margaret did? Your comments keep these incredible stories coming, and I read every single one. Sometimes the most devastating truth is that the people who should love us unconditionally are the ones who love us most conditionally of all. Reintenterclaude puede cometer errors. Por favor, verifique las respuestas.